But the single most important thing, and certainly an observation from the preparatory negotiations and the second United Nations Environment Programme itself, is that it has provided and will continue to provide what analysts described as a vehicle for states, international organizations, and civil society to discuss, debate, and engage in conflict and the environment. It has been argued that the delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals will require a step change in how the international community deals with the environmental dimensions of armed conflict. This resolution is the start of a long overdue conversation, and its greatest legacy could be that it marks the moment where the protection of the environment in relation to armed conflict stepped out of the legal seminars and into a political arena.
Increasingly, international law is addressing environment across the conflict life cycle. The UN's International Law Commission right now is completing a 3-year effort examining international law that protects the environment in relation to armed conflict. And that language is really important, in relation to, because it covers before, during, and after. And numerous scholars have looked at the question of international law protecting environment during armed conflict, its inadequacies, how it needs to be strengthened. But only now do you have a serious effort to look at international law governing protection of the environment before conflict and after conflict. And this is being done by the UN International Law Commission, which is the authoritative UN body on the statement of international law.
We have programs in the country that is helping put back in place environmental regulations, helping countries access international environmental finance, supporting countries acceding to multilateral environmental agreements, supporting the development of new environmental education, helping put in place systems of community-based natural resource management. So based on what the recommendations are of our post-conflict environmental assessments and what the needs of the country are, we then work with the country and the Environmental Protection Agency to put that in place.
Environmental factors have long had an impact on global migration flows, as people have historically left places with harsh or deteriorating conditions. However, the scale of such flows, both internal and cross-border, is expected to rise as a result of accelerated climate change, with unprecedented impact on lives and livelihoods. Such migration can have positive and negative effects on both the local coping capacity and the environment in areas from which these migrants originate, as well as in their temporary or permanent destinations. Migration, climate change, and the environment are interrelated. Just as environmental degradation and disasters can cause migration, movement of people can also entail significant effects on surrounding ecosystems. This complex nexus needs to be addressed in a holistic manner, experts have warned, taking into account other possible mediating factors, including human security, human and economic development, livelihood strategies, and conflict. Migration often seems to be misperceived as a failure to adapt to a changing environment. Environmentalists have advised that instead, migration can also be an adaptation strategy to climate and environmental change, and is an essential component of the social environmental interactions that needs to be managed. Migration can be a coping mechanism and survival strategy for those who move. At the same time, migration, and mass migration in particular, can also have significant environmental repercussions for areas of origin, areas of destination, and the migratory routes in between, and contribute to further environmental degradation.
And within the work stream of the Warsaw Mechanism, there are a number of areas where UNEP or the environmental community can also provide good advice and good input. So for example, looking at the drivers and the underlying risk factors that contribute to loss and damage. So for example, when we already see these impacts, the damages, what are they really? What is the scientific reason behind this? What really happened? So I think definitely UNEP can provide technical input to better understand the underlying drivers of loss and damage, but also we see a lot of movement now in terms of bridging the gap between humanitarian and development and climate change adaptation financing. So this is also where we need to come in and better understand how can these be complementary. And I think that's also a very, very important and interesting work stream where we can be engaged.
It is now increasingly recognized that environmental degradation and climate change are major drivers in both forced and voluntary migration, and that this trend is set to continue and substantially increase in scale in decades to come.
So what does this mean for the environmental community? Well, it's a matter of having policy responses that focus on people who are displaced, but also on preventing this displacement. Because we have to take into account that most people do not want to leave their home places. So it is about providing answers that avoid displacement, just so we do not end up with these millions of people displaced in the future. But if people are already moving or they have no other choices, then we have to look into policy options that can support these people, either facilitate movement in schemes like labor migration schemes, or relocation of people from areas which are simply not inhabitable anymore.
Poverty, failing ecosystems, vulnerability to natural hazards, and gradual climate-driven environmental changes are all linked to migration. Indeed, it is expected that climate change will significantly affect migration in three distinct ways. First, the effect of warming and drying in some regions will reduce agricultural potential and undermine ecosystem services, such as clean water and fertile soil. Second, the increase in extreme weather events, in particular heavy precipitation and struggling flash of river floods in tropical regions, will affect ever more people and generate mass displacement. Finally, sea level rise will permanently destroy extensive and highly productive low-lying coastal areas that are home to millions of people who will have to relocate permanently. While the consequences of mass migration are not negative, its main impact overwhelmingly are. These include escalating humanitarian crisis, rapid urbanization and associated slum growth, and stalled development. Well, that's our program for the day. Thank you for being a part of it. We hope to be back with you next week, but our inbox @file@channelstv.com is always available. From all of us here in Lagos, it's bye for now.